Imagine for just a moment the overwhelming passage of time so vast that it stretches across billions of years, where even the rise and fall of entire civilizations would vanish like a brief flicker of light in an endless night sky. In this journey together, we will move gently through the full 4.5 billion years of Earth's story, allowing the scale of events to unfold at a pace that reminds us how small, yet how meaningful our own place truly is within this immense history. The first chapters do not begin with forests or mountains or oceans, but with drifting clouds of gas and dust suspended in the stillness of space, waiting patiently until gravity's pull shaped them into something far greater than their scattered fragments. From this swirling nebula, the sun ignited in brilliant fire, and surrounding it were countless collisions of rock and ice that fused together in violent bursts of energy, until at last the molten beginnings of our planet came into existence. Through endless bombardments and oceans of magma, through storms of unimaginable force and silence deeper than any we can comprehend, the Earth began to cool and slowly transform into a world where oceans, continents, and eventually, the fragile spark of life itself could emerge. Every stone beneath our feet and every fossil buried in ancient layers is a page from this immense book of time, and together they preserve memories of a planet that had been shaped again and again by fire, water, and life's persistent struggle to survive. As you listen, allow yourself to drift slowly into this vast timeline, to sense the deep rhythm of Earth's heartbeat across the ages, and to reflect on how brief our own moments are compared to the eternal unfolding of this planetary story. And when you think carefully about your own place within this immense story of Earth, do you wonder what chapter humanity is writing right now, and what mark it will leave in the pages of deep time? The formation of Earth cannot be separated from the story of the Sun itself, because without the Sun's immense gravity pulling matter together, no planets would ever have come into being. When hydrogen atoms at the center of that collapsing cloud finally fused into helium, an event known as nuclear fusion, a brilliant new star was born that released enormous amounts of heat and light into the young solar system. Around this blazing center, the leftover debris formed a flattened protoplanetary disk, a whirling expanse of dust, ice, and gas that stretched outward across millions of kilometers, holding within it the seeds of worlds yet to come. As the disk spun, small particles stuck together through electrostatic forces. Then gravity pulled them into larger and larger clumps, a process known as accretion, which slowly created bodies called planetesimals that crashed and merged over countless millions of years. These planetesimals were not peaceful objects, but violent travelers that shattered one another in spectacular impacts, and only the largest and most stable fragments survived to continue gathering mass, gradually shaping themselves into the first young planets. Among the inner planets that emerged, Earth began as a molten sphere, glowing with the heat of relentless collisions, its surface so unstable that oceans and continents were not even conceivable in those fiery early days. The birth of Earth was not a singular event, but a continuous bombardment of asteroids and comets that added mass while also delivering vital elements. And in this chaotic period, the building blocks of future oceans and life itself were being delivered in hidden form. One of the most dramatic moments in this early history is believed to have been the collision with a Mars-sized body, often called Theia, whose impact was so catastrophic that it tore away vast amounts of molten debris which later coalesced into our moon. This hypothesis, known as the giant impact theory, is supported by the striking similarity between lunar rocks brought back by Apollo missions and rocks from Earth's crust, a discovery that gave scientists confidence that the Earth and Moon share a common violent origin. The experiments conducted by NASA's Apollo program in the late 1960s and early 1970s provided unprecedented evidence, as astronauts returned samples showing oxygen isotope ratios nearly identical to those of Earth, strengthening the case that our moon was born from Earth's own substance. In those first hundreds of millions of years, Earth's surface was a fiery ocean of magma, and the air was choked with toxic gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, and ammonia, a hostile environment far removed from the breathable atmosphere we rely on today. Despite this hostile beginning, water was already being introduced to the planet, possibly carried by icy comets and water-rich asteroids, as well as released from volcanic eruptions that vented water vapor into the thick atmosphere. As Earth cooled slowly over millions of years, this water vapor condensed and fell back as torrential rains, which eventually pooled into vast early oceans, beginning the slow transformation from a fiery planet to a watery world. The young sun itself was more volatile than it is today, releasing frequent solar flares and streams of charged particles. Yet Earth's forming magnetic field offered protection by deflecting much of this dangerous solar wind back into space. Without this early magnetic field generated by Earth's molten iron core, the solar wind might have stripped the planet of its developing atmosphere entirely, leaving it barren like Mars, but instead Earth retained the conditions necessary for oceans to remain. During this chaotic period, radioactive isotopes such as uranium, thorium, and potassium within Earth's interior released enormous amounts of heat, driving convection currents in the mantle and setting into motion the very beginnings of plate tectonics. Plate tectonics would later play a crucial role in shaping continents and recycling nutrients, but in these early days it was simply the restless shifting of a still cooling world struggling to release its inner energy. Scientists have pieced together these early processes through careful study of meteorites, which serve as time capsules of the solar system's beginnings, preserving the chemistry of the materials that once swirled in the same nebula that created Earth. In 1955, Claire Patterson, an American geochemist, used isotopic analysis of the uranium-lead system in meteorites to calculate Earth's age at 4.55 billion years, a result that has stood the test of time and remains the most precise estimate we have today. This discovery was revolutionary because it provided not only an age for Earth but also a timeline that anchored the events of planetary formation within the context of solar system history, transforming how we understand our origins in space. The picture that emerges from all of this evidence is one of constant destruction and renewal, where collisions created chaos yet also provided the materials necessary for growth, setting the stage for everything that would follow in Earth's story. When we imagine the birth of Earth, we must see it not as a gentle event, but as a sequence of violent and fiery transformations. And yet within this harsh crucible, the foundations were being laid for oceans, continents, and ultimately life. Even though these events occurred billions of years ago, their legacy continues today in the moon that lights our night sky, in the magnetic field that shields us, and in the rocks beneath our feet that whisper of a molten past. And so the story of Earth's birth is not one of stability, but of survival through chaos, a reminder that our planet's earliest moments were forged in violence, yet out of that violence came the possibility for everything alive today. As Earth continued to grow from countless impacts, the process of differentiation began, where heavy elements such as iron and nickel sank inward to form the dense metallic core, while lighter silicates floated upward to form the mantle and crust. This separation of materials was not instantaneous but occurred over millions of years, driven by the immense heat left over from collisions and radioactive decay, creating a layered planet with an inner structure that remains active to this day. The metallic core became the dynamo that would generate Earth's magnetic field, a shield that deflects the solar wind and protects the fragile gases of the atmosphere, ensuring that the conditions for life could one day emerge. Meanwhile, the crust slowly solidified on the surface, but frequent bombardments by asteroids and comets kept the young Earth unstable, melting large regions again and again, erasing any permanent surface features from those earliest times. These repeated impacts, though catastrophic, may have also delivered organic molecules such as amino acids, the chemical building blocks of proteins, hinting that even within destruction there were seeds of future biological potential. Scientists discovered in meteorites such as the Murchison meteorite, which fell in Australia in 1969, that amino acids can survive the journey through space and impact, offering evidence that life's ingredients were available long before Earth's biosphere began. The steady delivery of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen through cosmic debris enriched Earth's chemistry, providing a canvas upon which future oceans would mix these elements into more complex compounds. But before oceans and life could exist, Earth needed stability, and this was far from guaranteed during its early days, when gravitational tugs from neighboring planets and constant impacts made the young solar system a dangerous place. Mars, larger in its youth relative to Earth, pulled at the asteroid belt, scattering fragments toward the inner planets, while Jupiter's immense gravity disrupted orbital paths, hurling countless bodies inward to crash into Earth's surface. This chaotic orbital dance continued for hundreds of millions of years, a period known as the Late Heavy Bombardment, when Earth, the Moon, and Mercury all show signs of frequent massive impacts etched into their ancient surfaces. Evidence of this bombardment is still visible on the Moon today, where craters remain preserved in stark clarity because the Moon has no atmosphere or erosion to erase them, unlike Earth where tectonics and weather have recycled most early scars. The late heavy bombardment may have been devastating for early stability, but it also ensured that Earth received enormous amounts of water and volatile elements from icy comets, which became crucial for building the oceans. By the end of this period, Earth had cooled enough that water vapor condensed into rainfall that fell for millions of years, filling vast depressions to create the first long-lasting seas, shifting the planet's appearance forever from fiery red to deep blue. This transformation into a watery world was profound because oceans act as both cradles of chemistry and regulators of climate, allowing carbon dioxide to dissolve into the seas and stabilize atmospheric conditions over time. With oceans covering much of its surface, Earth began to resemble the planet we recognize today, even though its air remained hostile, filled with carbon dioxide, methane, and sulfur gases rather than the oxygen-rich atmosphere that now supports us. The sun itself was not yet the steady star we depend on because in its youth it shone 30% dimmer than it does now, a mystery known as the faint young sun paradox, which raises the question of how Earth avoided freezing despite weaker sunlight. Scientists such as Carl Sagan proposed that greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide and methane created a warming blanket around the planet, preventing Earth's oceans from freezing solid and keeping the climate habitable for chemistry to proceed. This balance between the faint young sun and a greenhouse atmosphere was delicate, but it allowed Earth to maintain liquid water, which would become the medium for life's first chemical reactions and eventual biological innovations. As the young Earth settled into relative stability, its rotation and tilt began to establish cycles of day and night, and volcanic outgassing continuously replenished the atmosphere, creating a dynamic system that interacted with oceans and rocks. Plate tectonics, though still in their infancy, began to recycle crust and regulate surface temperatures, laying the groundwork for the carbon cycle that would stabilize Earth's climate over geological time. The Moon, born from the impact with Theia, also played an essential role because its gravitational pull slowed Earth's rapid rotation and created tides that stirred the early oceans, mixing nutrients and energy in ways that would later nurture life. Without the Moon's stabilizing influence, Earth's axis might have wobbled chaotically, causing extreme climate swings, but instead the tilt has remained steady, providing predictable seasons for billions of years. The legacy of these cosmic accidents and collisions is that Earth emerged not as a barren rock, but as a complex system with oceans, atmosphere, magnetic field, and a stable orbit around a long-lived star, each element vital to what would follow. By the close of the first 500 million years, Earth had transformed from a fiery sphere into a world of oceans beneath a toxic sky, a planet still hostile, but holding within it the promise of life that would one day flourish. What began as swirling clouds of dust and gas had become a living planet's foundation, and though life had not yet appeared, the stage was set for chemistry to cross the threshold into biology. a story that would define the next chapter of Earth's journey. The Hadean Aeon, named after Hades, the Greek god of the underworld, represents the earliest chapter of Earth's surface history, beginning around 4.5 billion years ago and lasting until about 4.0 billion years ago, a time when the planet was still recovering from its violent birth. This was not a time of gentle landscapes or thriving ecosystems, but a world dominated by fire, bombardment, and constant geological upheaval, a place that would have appeared utterly alien to modern eyes. The surface of Earth remained covered in molten rock for millions of years, with volcanic eruptions pouring lava across vast regions, while the atmosphere was thick with gases such as carbon dioxide, methane, nitrogen, and ammonia that offered no breath of life. Massive asteroid and comet impacts continued to pummel the surface, generating shockwaves that melted entire regions of crust and vaporized oceans of magma into plumes of superheated rock vapor that fell back as fiery rain. The evidence for this violent era comes from the cratered surfaces of the Moon and Mercury, which have preserved the scars of bombardments that must have struck Earth as well, though our planet's active geology has erased most traces of those ancient wounds. One of the most significant consequences of this relentless violence was the slow accumulation of more permanent crust, as the planet began to cool enough for solid rock to persist on the surface without being entirely remelted by fresh impacts. This crust was likely composed largely of basalt, a dark volcanic rock that forms when lava cools quickly, and over time patches of lighter granitic rock began to appear, marking the first seeds of continental material that would grow in later eons. Even in this hostile world, water was steadily making its presence known, condensing from volcanic outgassing and cometary delivery into heavy rains that fell for thousands of years, gradually pooling into the earliest oceans on the cooling crust. These first oceans were not clear blue seas, but boiling, mineral-rich basins filled with dissolved metals, constantly stirred by impacts and volcanic heat. Yet they formed the foundation for chemistry that would eventually cross the threshold into biology. Scientists believe that zircons, tiny crystals found in ancient rocks in Western Australia, provide some of the earliest evidence for liquid water around 4.4 billion years ago, hinting that Earth's oceans may have appeared surprisingly early in its history. These zircons, studied by researchers such as John Valley in the 2000s, showed isotopic signatures consistent with the presence of liquid water, a discovery that challenged the assumption that Earth remained entirely molten for hundreds of millions of years. The presence of oceans so early in Earth's story is extraordinary, because it suggests that despite the chaos of impacts, the planet was already beginning to stabilize enough to host vast reservoirs of liquid water, the essential ingredient for life. At the same time, the atmosphere during the Hadean was dense and suffocating, composed of greenhouse gases that trapped immense amounts of heat, preventing the planet from freezing under the faint young sun's weaker radiation. This greenhouse effect, which Carl Sagan later described as a solution to the faint young sun paradox, ensured that Earth remained warm enough for liquid water despite receiving far less energy from the sun than it does today. Volcanoes belched carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrogen into the sky, creating a toxic but vital atmospheric mix that would provide the raw materials for chemical reactions leading toward the first prebiotic molecules. In the 1950s, Stanley Miller and Harold Urey conducted their famous experiment, simulating the early Earth's atmosphere by circulating methane, ammonia, water vapor, and hydrogen through an electrical spark, which produced amino acids, the basic units of proteins. Though the actual Hadean atmosphere may have differed from their assumptions, the Miller-Urey experiment demonstrated that organic molecules could form naturally under early Earth-like conditions, suggesting a plausible pathway toward life's origins. Meanwhile, Earth's magnetic field, generated by its liquid iron core, had already begun to form, and this invisible shield protected the atmosphere from being stripped away by the constant flow of solar wind from the young sun. The Moon, created by the earlier impact with Theia, played an equally crucial role during the Hadean by stabilizing Earth's axial tilt, which prevented chaotic swings in climate that could have hindered the long-term accumulation of oceans and atmosphere. Tidal forces from the moon stirred the early oceans, creating cycles of ebb and flow that would later provide shallow tidal pools, rich in minerals, where complex chemistry could take place more efficiently than in the open sea. Despite the chaos of impacts and eruptions, these combined conditions, liquid water, an atmosphere rich in carbon and nitrogen, volcanic energy, and tidal mixing, were beginning to lay the groundwork for the first whispers of life, even if true organisms had not yet appeared. The Hadean was therefore not merely an age of destruction, but an age of preparation, a crucible where Earth's surface, oceans, and skies were forged into a system capable of supporting the complex transformations yet to come. As the Hadean eon advanced, the Earth's surface became a shifting patchwork of solidifying crust and molten seas, where tectonic fragments collided and sank, recycling rock back into the mantle in a primitive version of the plate tectonics that would dominate later ages. These early proto-continents were unstable and short-lived, rising from volcanic activity only to be destroyed again by massive impacts or subsumed by the restless flow of the mantle beneath them. The constant cycle of destruction and renewal meant that little permanent geology survived from this earliest eon, yet hints remain in the form of ancient zircon crystals that have endured for over 4 billion years, carrying within them a record of conditions long vanished. These zircons, found in places like the Jack Hills of Western Australia, contain isotopic evidence of interaction with liquid water, implying that even amid catastrophic bombardment, Earth may have maintained patches of ocean where chemistry could quietly unfold. This discovery is extraordinary because it suggests that Earth was not an entirely hellish inferno, but a complex and dynamic world where molten rock, oceans, and atmosphere coexisted in a fragile balance that hinted at possibilities for life. Yet life itself had not appeared, for the Hadean was still dominated by raw chemistry, where molecules collided, combined, and broke apart in countless permutations driven by heat, radiation, and the energy of impacts. In this chemical world, carbon dioxide dissolved into oceans, reacting with minerals to form carbonates, while volcanic sulfur altered seawater chemistry, producing gradients of energy that may have later been harnessed by primitive life. Hydrothermal vents, where seawater percolated through cracks in the crust and met the intense heat of the mantle, created rich environments of minerals and chemical reactions, perhaps some of the earliest laboratories of prebiotic chemistry. Modern studies, inspired by scientists such as Michael Russell, suggest that these alkaline hydrothermal vents could have provided natural proton gradients, energy sources similar to those used by living cells today, making them candidates for life's birthplace. Whether in tidal pools, hydrothermal vents, or shallow seas, the chemistry of the Hadean was experimenting relentlessly, producing amino acids, lipids, and other organic molecules that might one day assemble into the first self-replicating systems. At the same time, Earth's skies were alive with lightning storms fueled by thick clouds of volcanic gases, and ultraviolet radiation from the sun penetrated the atmosphere, adding additional energy to chemical reactions in the oceans and air. The balance between destruction and creation defined this eon, for just as chemistry was advancing toward complexity, impacts from asteroids and comets frequently reset the stage, vaporizing oceans and sterilizing surfaces in sudden cataclysms. This repeating cycle of devastation and recovery may have delayed the appearance of life, yet it also ensured a constant replenishment of raw materials, making the Hadean a time of preparation rather than fulfillment. Scientists often debate whether life could have survived this hostile era at all, with some suggesting that if organisms arose during the Hadean, they may have been annihilated by impacts, only to emerge again later under more stable conditions. What is clear, however, is that by the end of the Hadean eon, Earth had transformed from a molten sphere into a planet with oceans, atmosphere, crust, and a stabilizing moon, a foundation upon which life could soon begin to take root. The faint young sun paradox still lingered, for the star shone dimly, yet Earth remained warm enough, and this suggests that greenhouse gases such as methane and carbon dioxide were performing a crucial role in maintaining a habitable temperature. Studies of isotopic ratios in ancient rocks provide indirect evidence that methane may have been abundant, a gas far more effective at trapping heat than carbon dioxide, allowing Earth to remain unfrozen despite weaker sunlight. The Hadean therefore becomes a paradoxical chapter, one of fire and ice, chaos and stability, destruction and preparation, where Earth endured enough violence to shape its structure, yet enough calm to preserve its oceans and chemistry. By around 4.0 billion years ago, the relentless intensity of impacts began to wane and the planet entered a more stable phase, marking the transition into the Archean Eon, where the first signs of life would eventually appear. Though we have no fossil from the Hadean, the evidence preserved in ancient minerals, isotopes and lunar craters has allowed scientists to reconstruct a vision of this hidden era, an age of shadows that set the stage for everything that followed. In reflecting on this time, we must imagine a planet shrouded in storms, oceans boiling with minerals, skies darkened by volcanic ash. Yet within this seeming chaos, chemistry was quietly rehearsing the first steps of biology. The Hadean Eon may never reveal all its secrets, but what it has shown us is profound. Earth's path to habitability was not simple or easy. It was born from chaos and fire, yet it created the conditions for life's grand experiment to begin. As the final shadows of the Hadean began to fade, Earth was no longer only a world of fire and chaos, but a planet where oceans had settled, the crust had stabilized, and the atmosphere, though hostile, was beginning to provide the chemistry necessary for life. This transition marked the beginning of the Archean Eon, a chapter lasting from around 4.0 to 2.5 billion years ago, when Earth's surface cooled enough to sustain more permanent oceans and continents, and when the first whispers of life finally emerged. The Archean was not a calm paradise, but a restless world where volcanoes still erupted constantly, tectonic plates shifted more rapidly than today, and the sun shone dimmer than in modern times, yet liquid water persisted and life found a way to take root. In these oceans, something extraordinary began to occur, for simple molecules were combining, replicating, and evolving into the first forms of life, most likely single-celled microbes that lived unseen in the shallow seas and vents of the Archean Earth. The earliest evidence for life during this time comes from stromatolites, layered structures built by communities of cyanobacteria, which trapped and bound sediments together, leaving behind fossilized mounds that can still be found in places like Western Australia and South Africa. These stromatolites, some dated to about 3.5 billion years ago, are among the oldest biological structures on Earth, and their existence reveals that microbial life was not only present, but already altering its environment in profound ways. Cyanobacteria performed photosynthesis, capturing sunlight and using it to split water molecules, releasing oxygen as a byproduct, a process that would slowly transform Earth's atmosphere over hundreds of millions of years. Though oxygen initially accumulated only in local environments, often being absorbed by iron in the oceans, it marked the beginning of a planetary transformation that would later be known as the Great Oxidation Event. The discovery of stromatolites was a turning point in our understanding of early life, and scientists such as J. William Schopf have dedicated decades to studying microfossils and ancient rocks to confirm the biological origin of these layered structures. The Archean Earth was a microbial world where life existed entirely at the microscopic level, yet even these tiny organisms played a role in shaping oceans, atmosphere and climate, proving that small forms of life can alter an entire planet. Alongside cyanobacteria, other microbes thrived in extreme environments such as hydrothermal vents, where they harnessed chemical energy from sulfur and iron, foreshadowing the diversity of life that would later adapt to nearly every corner of the biosphere. It was during the late 1970s that Carl Woese revolutionized biology by discovering archaea, a domain of life distinct from bacteria and eukaryotes. showing that the microbial world of early Earth was far more diverse than anyone had previously imagined. This discovery revealed that the Archean biosphere was not simply one lineage of microbes, but a branching web of life, experimenting with different chemistries and survival strategies in oceans that were teeming with invisible innovation. The surface of Earth during the Archean would have looked strange to us, with skies tinted orange by methane haze, continents far smaller and scattered, and shallow seas stretching across much of the planet, nurturing microbial mats. Geological evidence suggests that tectonic activity during this time was more vigorous than today, with heat flowing from Earth's interior at nearly 3 times the present rate, driving rapid recycling of crust and constant reshaping of the planet's surface. Continents as we know them were only beginning to form, built from lighter granitic rocks that floated above denser basaltic crust, and these land masses would slowly grow through volcanic eruptions and collisions to create the first stable cratons. These cratons, some of which remain today in Canada, Greenland and Australia, are the geological ancestors of our modern continents, ancient fragments that survived billions of years of tectonic upheaval. In the Archean atmosphere, oxygen was still scarce and methane was abundant, creating greenhouse conditions that kept Earth warm beneath a fainter sun, while also producing a protective haze that may have shielded microbes from ultraviolet radiation. This haze would have given Earth an orange sky and a dimmer light, a world both alien and familiar, with oceans alive with microbial life even as the land remained barren and empty of plants or animals. The Archean eon demonstrates how life and planet co-evolve, for microbes influenced the chemistry of the oceans and atmosphere, while Earth's geology provided the energy and nutrients that sustained those earliest organisms. By the close of the Archean, the stage was set for even greater transformations, as oxygen would soon accumulate in the atmosphere and reshape the planet in ways that no microbe could have anticipated, ushering in the next dramatic chapter of Earth's history. As life spread across the Archean oceans, it was still confined to the microscopic realm, invisible to the naked eye yet profoundly influential, because even the smallest changes in microbial activity could alter the chemistry of entire seas. The metabolism of these microbes varied widely, with some using sunlight to drive photosynthesis, others consuming sulfur compounds from volcanic vents, and still others extracting energy directly from iron-rich waters, demonstrating that evolution was already experimenting with diverse survival strategies. One of the most striking consequences of microbial activity was the slow but steady release of oxygen into the oceans, where it reacted with dissolved iron to form banded iron formations, layered rocks of red and grey that still mark ancient seafloors today. These banded iron formations, or BIFs, represent a geological record of oxygen's first appearance, as iron absorbed the gas until the oceans became saturated, a process that would eventually spill over into the atmosphere itself. By studying these rocks, scientists have been able to trace the gradual rise of oxygen in the Archean, a transformation that was invisible at first but set the stage for the Great Oxidation event around 2.4 billion years ago. The release of oxygen was not only a blessing but also a challenge, for oxygen is a reactive molecule that can damage cells unprepared to handle it, meaning that early life faced both opportunity and danger as this new chemistry unfolded. Microbes that adapted to oxygen thrived, while those that could not were pushed into anoxic environments such as deep sediments or hydrothermal vents, creating new ecological niches that would shape the course of evolution. The emergence of oxygen-producing cyanobacteria was one of the most pivotal developments in Earth's history, for it marked the beginning of a biosphere that could transform its own planet, a power unmatched by any geological process. The fossil evidence for cyanobacteria is found not only in stromatolites but also in microfossils preserved in cherts, fine-grained sedimentary rocks that captured the shapes of these tiny organisms across billions of years. These findings remind us that even the simplest forms of life leave lasting imprints, and that Earth's deep past is recorded not just in mountains and craters, but in the microscopic remains of ancient microbes. Alongside oxygen's rise, the Archean was also a time when Earth's continents began to grow more significantly, with stable cratons merging and expanding, forming larger land masses that would influence ocean currents and climate. The growth of continental crust was critical because it provided shallow coastal environments where microbial mats flourished, capturing sunlight, trapping sediments, and leaving behind stromatolite reefs that extended across ancient shorelines. These microbial mats were more than passive structures, for they altered local chemistry, producing oxygen bubbles, changing the composition of sediments, and even stabilizing coastlines against erosion, demonstrating that life was already engineering its environment. The idea that life could shape its own world was later formalized by scientists like James Lovelock in the Gaia hypothesis, which suggests that living organisms and Earth systems co-evolve in ways that stabilize the planet over time. Though controversial in its details, this perspective emphasizes that even during the Archean, life was not simply adapting to Earth, but was actively influencing oceans, atmosphere, and geology in a planetary feedback loop. The Archean skies would have appeared strange to us, filled with haze created by methane-producing microbes or methanogens, which thrived in oxygen-poor environments and contributed to greenhouse warming that kept Earth's climate habitable. This haze may have created conditions similar to Saturn's moon Titan, with an orange-tinted sky and organic molecules raining down into oceans, adding further ingredients to the chemical soup of the early biosphere. The interplay between methane, carbon dioxide, and emerging oxygen defined the Archean atmosphere, a delicate balance that influenced both climate and the direction of microbial evolution across millions of years. Meanwhile, tectonic activity continued to recycle crust and release volcanic gases, feeding nutrients into the oceans, ensuring that life remained supplied with the essential elements required for growth and replication. By the end of the Archean, Earth was no longer just a world of chemistry, but a world undeniably biological. A planet whose oceans teemed with microbial life, whose rocks bore the scars of oxygen's arrival, and whose continents were beginning to shape global patterns. The stage was set for the Great Oxidation Event, a planetary revolution that would forever change the chemistry of the atmosphere, the makeup of the oceans, and the destiny of life itself. And as we leave behind the Archean and step into the Proterozoic, we move into a world where oxygen will dominate, where eukaryotic cells will arise, and where life will prepare itself for the explosion of complexity that still lay far in the future. The Archean world, though already alive with microbes, was still an alien place compared to our own, with skies tinted by methane haze, oceans rich in iron, and continents small and scattered. Yet this was the stage upon which one of the most dramatic transformations in Earth's history would unfold. This transformation is known as the Great Oxidation Event, a turning point around 2.4 billion years ago, when oxygen began to accumulate in the atmosphere on a scale large enough to alter the chemistry of oceans, rocks, and air forever. The slow work of cyanobacteria had already been producing oxygen for hundreds of millions of years, but until this point it had been absorbed by iron in seawater or consumed by chemical reactions, leaving the atmosphere nearly devoid of the gas. When the oceans finally became saturated with iron, oxygen could no longer be hidden away in rocks, and instead it began to escape upward into the atmosphere, gradually transforming the very air that surrounded the planet. This rise of oxygen was catastrophic for many organisms, because while oxygen sustains us today, it is also a highly reactive molecule that can damage proteins, lipids, and DNA, creating an environment toxic to microbes unprepared for its presence. The fossil record shows that entire microbial ecosystems vanished as oxygen spread, forcing anaerobic life into hidden refuges deep underground, within sediments, or around hydrothermal vents where oxygen could not reach. Yet out of this crisis came opportunity, because organisms that adapted to oxygen gained access to far more efficient energy pathways, eventually leading to the evolution of more complex cells that would shape the future of life. The evidence for this event is preserved in banded iron formations, enormous layers of rock deposited across the world, alternating between iron-rich and iron-poor bands, recording the cycles of oxygen reacting with seawater in Earth's early oceans. These formations, found in regions such as Canada, Australia, and South Africa, not only testify to the chemistry of early oceans but also serve as the source of much of the iron that fuels modern industry, linking ancient biological events to our present civilization. Another line of evidence comes from sulfur isotopes, because before the rise of oxygen, volcanic sulfur gases left distinct chemical signatures in rocks. But after oxygen increased, these signatures disappeared, marking a profound shift in atmospheric chemistry. Geochemists such as Donald Canfield studied these patterns, helping to establish the timeline of the Great Oxidation event, and showing that oxygen's rise was not uniform but punctuated by fluctuations and even reversals over tens of millions of years. This was not a sudden change but a long and complex revolution, where oxygen levels rose, fell, and rose again, reflecting the tug-of-war between microbial production, chemical sinks, and geological processes that consumed or released gases. As oxygen accumulated, it reacted with methane in the atmosphere, a powerful greenhouse gas, and this reaction reduced Earth's warming blanket, potentially triggering one of the first global glaciations in the planet's history. This ancient ice age, sometimes called the Huronian glaciation, may have lasted for hundreds of millions of years, covering much of the planet in ice and testing the resilience of early microbial life that had only just begun to thrive. The Huronian glaciation was a reminder that biology and climate are intertwined, because the success of cyanobacteria in producing oxygen altered not only the chemistry of the air but also the temperature of the entire planet. Despite these icebound challenges, life endured, adapting to oxygen-rich environments and experimenting with new metabolisms, setting the stage for the appearance of eukaryotes, cells with internal structures that allowed greater complexity. The rise of eukaryotes was one of the most revolutionary steps in the history of biology, because these cells contained nuclei to store DNA and organelles such as mitochondria to generate energy with extraordinary efficiency. The theory of how eukaryotes arose was championed by Lynn Margulis, who proposed endosymbiosis, the idea that mitochondria and chloroplasts were once free-living bacteria that took up residence inside larger cells in a mutually beneficial relationship. Though controversial when first proposed, Margulis's theory is now widely accepted, supported by genetic evidence showing that mitochondria and chloroplasts possess their own DNA, closely related to bacterial ancestors. This symbiotic leap allowed eukaryotic cells to generate energy far more efficiently than their prokaryotic counterparts, enabling them to grow larger, store more genetic information, and diversify into new ecological roles. The Proterozoic eon, which lasted from 2.5 billion to 541 million years ago, was therefore an age of quiet revolutions where oxygen reshaped the air, glaciers tested the resilience of life, and eukaryotic cells opened the door to complexity. While less visually dramatic than later periods with dinosaurs or forests, this era laid the deep foundations for everything to come, because without oxygen, without eukaryotes, and without stable continents, the explosion of animals in the Cambrian would never have been possible. As oxygen gradually established itself in the atmosphere, the Earth's surface began to change in ways that would have been unimaginable during the Archean, for rocks weathered differently, oceans became clearer, and the biosphere grew more dynamic under the influence of this new chemical force. Continents expanded further during the Proterozoic, with stable cratons merging into larger land masses such as Columbia and later Rodinia, supercontinents that shifted slowly across the globe and altered patterns of ocean currents and climate. The creation of these supercontinents not only shaped geography but also influenced life, because shallow coastal seas expanded along their margins, providing vast habitats where microbial mats and early eukaryotes could thrive. Sedimentary rocks from this period record the increasing presence of oxygen, not as a sudden flood, but as a gradual rise punctuated by reversals, with atmospheric levels hovering far below modern values, yet still high enough to transform ecosystems forever. Within this changing environment, eukaryotic cells diversified, experimenting with new forms, some adopting photosynthesis through symbiosis with cyanobacteria that became chloroplasts, others refining the use of mitochondria to power complex metabolisms. These innovations made eukaryotes more versatile than prokaryotes, allowing them to explore new niches and eventually to form colonies where cells cooperated, hinting at the first steps toward multicellularity. The fossil record provides glimpses of these early eukaryotes in the form of microfossils preserved in shale deposits, with spherical cells such as Grippania spiralis, dating to about 1.6 billion years ago, representing some of the earliest known complex organisms. Though these fossils are rare and often ambiguous, they show that complexity was stirring quietly in the oceans long before animals appeared, with life building the cellular machinery that would eventually support bodies, tissues, and organs. As oxygen continued to rise, the oceans themselves became layered, with oxygenated surface waters floating above anoxic depths, creating stratified environments where different forms of life could specialize and evolve. The geochemist James Casting has argued that this oxygenation not only allowed for more energetic metabolisms, but also led to the buildup of an ozone layer, which shielded Earth's surface from harmful ultraviolet radiation and made shallow environments safer for life. With protection from the sun's most damaging rays, eukaryotes were free to colonize surface waters and expand into new ecological zones, spreading their influence across the globe in ways prokaryotes never had before. It was during the mid-Proterozoic, often called the boring billion because of the apparent lack of dramatic fossil evidence, that life was in fact slowly refining its complexity in hidden ways, laying invisible groundwork for the revolution still to come. Though the fossil record seems quiet, molecular clocks based on genetic comparisons suggest that the ancestors of plants, fungi, and animals may already have been diverging during this period, unseen in the oceans. By around 1.2 billion years ago, evidence of simple multicellular algae appears in red algal fossils such as Bangiomorpha pubescens, the earliest known organism to reproduce sexually, a breakthrough that accelerated evolutionary innovation. Sexual reproduction introduced the possibility of mixing genetic material, increasing diversity and adaptability, and it marked a profound shift in the evolutionary toolkit of life. Meanwhile, oxygen levels continued to climb slowly, and by around 800 million years ago, they reached thresholds sufficient to support larger multicellular organisms, preparing the world for the great diversification that would soon follow. The late Proterozoic also witnessed profound climatic swings, including the so-called snowball Earth events, where glaciers may have extended to the equator, covering nearly the entire planet in ice for millions of years. These global glaciations were likely triggered by the drawdown of greenhouse gases as continents weathered and pulled carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, demonstrating again how geology, chemistry, and life are bound in feedback loops. Life, however, endured beneath the ice, perhaps in refuges near hydrothermal vents or in pockets of open water at the edges of glaciers. And when the planet thawed, ecosystems exploded with new opportunities. By the close of the Proterozoic, around 541 million years ago, Earth was no longer the microbial world of the Archean, but a planet where oxygen filled the skies, continents had grown vast, and multicellular organisms had taken their first true steps into the evolutionary spotlight. This transformation was the result of billions of years of patient microbial labor, geological change, and symbiotic innovation, a reminder that revolutions in Earth's history are not always sudden but can emerge from long, quiet processes. And as the Proterozoic gave way to the Cambrian, the stage was set for the most spectacular burst of evolutionary creativity the planet had ever seen, the Cambrian explosion, when animals would diversify in ways that reshaped life forever. The close of the Proterozoic set the stage for one of the most extraordinary transitions in Earth's history, as the quiet world of microbial mats and simple multicellular algae gave way to an explosion of animal life that filled the seas with diversity and innovation. This transformation, known as the Cambrian explosion, occurred around 541 million years ago, and in just a few tens of millions of years, nearly every major body plan that would ever exist appeared in the fossil record, an unprecedented leap in evolutionary creativity. The fossils of the Burgess Shale in Canada, discovered in 1909 by Charles Walcott, provide one of the most vivid windows into this period, preserving delicate creatures in exquisite detail and revealing ecosystems more complex than anyone had expected for such an early time. Among these fossils are bizarre forms such as Hallucigenia, with spines jutting from its back and tentacle-like legs, and Anomalocaris, a meter-long predator with grasping appendages and a circular mouth, both unlike anything alive today. These strange animals demonstrate that evolution was not merely producing familiar shapes, but was experimenting widely with forms, many of which would vanish without descendants, leaving behind only hints of their brief time in the Cambrian seas. One reason for the Cambrian explosion may have been the rise of oxygen to levels high enough to support more active metabolisms, allowing animals to grow larger, move faster, and develop complex tissues such as nerves and muscles. Another contributing factor was the evolution of vision. Because fossils show evidence of compound eyes in Cambrian arthropods, and the arms race between predators and prey likely accelerated diversification in a feedback loop of adaptation and survival. The development of hard body parts such as shells and exoskeletons also changed the fossil record dramatically, both protecting animals from predation and leaving behind durable remains that could be preserved for hundreds of millions of years. These new defenses spurred the evolution of stronger jaws, faster movement, and more efficient sensory organs, leading to a cascade of innovations that gave the Cambrian seas a vibrancy unmatched by earlier ecosystems. The Cambrian explosion is sometimes described as evolution's Big Bang, because it established the basic blueprints of nearly all modern animal groups, from arthropods and mollusks to chordates, the lineage that would eventually give rise to vertebrates. The appearance of the first chordates, small fish-like creatures with notochords, marks the origin of a lineage that would one day lead to fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, including ourselves. Paleontologists such as Stephen Jay Gould emphasized the uniqueness of the Cambrian explosion in his book Wonderful Life, arguing that chance played a large role in which body plans survived and which disappeared forever. This perspective suggests that the history of life is not a straight march toward progress, but a branching tree of possibilities, where extinction and survival are intertwined with randomness and contingency. The Cambrian seas themselves were dynamic, filled with trilobites crawling along the seafloor, worms burrowing through sediments, sponges filtering water, and predators cruising above, creating ecosystems with food webs far more complex than anything seen before. Trilobites, with their segmented bodies and compound eyes, became one of the most successful groups of the Paleozoic, diversifying into thousands of species and leaving behind a rich fossil record that spans over 250 million years. The Cambrian explosion was not limited to animals, for algae also diversified, fueling ecosystems with photosynthesis and providing energy that supported the new abundance of animal life. Geochemical evidence suggests that nutrient levels in the oceans, particularly phosphorus and nitrogen, may have increased due to weathering of continents, creating fertile seas where life could flourish more rapidly. The interplay of oxygen, nutrients, evolution of new genes, and ecological competition created a perfect storm of conditions that made the Cambrian explosion possible, a convergence that may never have been repeated in Earth's history. Yet despite its rapidity, the Cambrian explosion still unfolded over tens of millions of years, reminding us that what seems like a sudden burst in the fossil record is still vast in human terms, a time scale beyond everyday comprehension. This period also underscores the importance of fossils such as those of the Chengjiang biota in China, another site of exceptional preservation that revealed soft-bodied organisms similar to those of the Burgess Shale, adding depth to our understanding of Cambrian life. Together, the Burgess Shale and Chengjiang fossils paint a picture of ecosystems teeming with diversity, where predators, grazers, and filter feeders interacted in complex webs, pushing one another toward new evolutionary solutions. The Cambrian explosion was thus not simply the origin of animals, but the origin of ecological complexity, a leap that transformed Earth from a microbial world into a planet of predators and prey, with relationships that echo into the present. As the Cambrian seas filled with strange new creatures, ecosystems grew increasingly interconnected, with food webs expanding to include not only microbes and algae, but also larger animals that hunted, scavenged, and competed for survival. The arms race between predators and prey drove rapid evolutionary change, as organisms with shells, spines, and mobility fared better than those without, creating a feedback loop of innovation that defined the age. Trilobites, already abundant, developed stronger exoskeletons and more sensitive vision, while early worms evolved burrowing behaviors that allowed them to escape danger and exploit new ecological niches beneath the sediment. These burrowing behaviors, known as bioturbation, transformed seafloor environments by mixing sediments, aerating them, and altering nutrient cycles, effectively engineering ecosystems in ways unseen before the Cambrian. Arthropods diversified beyond trilobites, with forms resembling early crustaceans and insects, their segmented bodies and jointed limbs giving them unmatched versatility in swimming, crawling, and hunting. Among the predators, Anomalocaris held dominance, its compound eyes granting advanced vision, and its flexible swimming flaps enabling swift pursuit of prey, making it one of the first apex predators in Earth's history. The presence of such predators spurred defensive adaptations, leading to the evolution of armored shells, spiny coverings, and even the first hints of behavioral strategies, such as burrowing deeper or living in groups for protection. Mollusks emerged during this time, experimenting with coiled shells and muscular foot-like structures, lineages that would eventually lead to snails, clams, and cephalopods, the latter of which became some of the ocean's most sophisticated hunters. Chordates also began to diversify quietly, with early fish-like forms developing notochords, gill slits, and segmented muscles, traits that would later support the rise of vertebrates and a future where life would one day conquer land. The Cambrian explosion reveals that evolution is not a straight line but a branching experiment, for many body plans that appeared during this time left no descendants, their forms unique to a brief window of Earth's history. Fossils of creatures like Opabinia, with 5 eyes and a long, flexible proboscis, remind us that evolution explored designs far stranger than those that survived, and chance determined which persisted into the future. Stephen Jay Gould argued that if the tape of life were replayed from the Cambrian, the outcome might be entirely different, with body plans we consider familiar today possibly never arising at all. Yet others, such as Simon Conway Morris, emphasize the concept of convergence, noting that similar ecological pressures often produce similar solutions, suggesting that some features, like eyes or limbs, may have been inevitable. This debate highlights the tension between contingency and inevitability in evolution, and the Cambrian explosion stands as the clearest example of how both chance and necessity can shape the diversity of life. Beyond biology, the Cambrian explosion also transformed the planet itself because burrowing animals altered sediments, filtering organisms clarified waters, and predators shifted the balance of ecosystems, making Earth a biologically driven planet in new ways. Geological evidence shows that carbonate reefs built by microbial mats were joined by reefs built by early animals such as sponges and archaeocyathids, marking the first animal-built ecosystems in Earth's history. These reefs provided shelter, feeding grounds, and ecological complexity that supported even greater biodiversity, a pattern that would continue across the ages with corals and reef-building organisms shaping marine life. The Cambrian explosion was not a single event, but a series of radiations that unfolded across tens of millions of years, with different groups rising, diversifying, and stabilizing as ecosystems matured. By around 500 million years ago, the outlines of modern ecosystems were already visible, with food webs, specialized roles, and complex interactions that mirrored the structure of today's oceans. Yet this flourishing also carried with it the seeds of extinction, for as diversity grew, so too did competition, and many experimental body plans vanished, leaving fossils as their only trace in the layers of Cambrian rock. The legacy of the Cambrian explosion is profound because it shows how quickly complexity can emerge when conditions align, and how life can leap from simplicity to richness in a geological instant. From microbes and mats, the Earth had become a world of animals, predators, reefs, and ecosystems, a planet whose biosphere now pulsed with energy and diversity that would continue to grow in future ages. And as the Cambrian gave way to the Ordovician, life would soon expand even further, colonizing new environments, diversifying in the seas, and setting the stage for the next great chapters in the history of Earth's living world. The Cambrian explosion transformed the oceans into teeming ecosystems, but for hundreds of millions of years the land above sea level remained barren, shaped only by wind, rain, and volcanic activity, with no plants, fungi, or animals to soften its appearance. Continents were already shifting and colliding, forming mountain ranges and shallow coastal seas, yet the landscapes themselves would have looked stark and lifeless, with rocky surfaces exposed beneath skies filled with drifting clouds of methane and carbon dioxide. Life's first steps onto land began not with plants or animals, but with microbial mats and films of cyanobacteria that colonized moist surfaces near shorelines, creating slippery layers that trapped sediments and stabilized soils. These simple mats prepared the way for more complex organisms by beginning to alter the chemistry of terrestrial environments, slowly enriching them with organic matter that could one day support larger life forms. Fungi likely played a crucial role in this transition, for their ability to break down minerals and release nutrients helped create the earliest soils, forming partnerships with primitive plants in a collaboration that would prove essential for terrestrial ecosystems. The fossil record suggests that the earliest land plants appeared during the Ordovician period, around 470 million years ago, beginning with tiny bryophyte-like organisms that resembled modern mosses and liverworts. These plants lacked roots and vascular systems, which meant they hugged damp ground near water sources, but their presence marked the beginning of a profound transformation, for they introduced photosynthesis and organic matter to land surfaces. Over time, vascular tissues evolved, enabling plants to transport water and nutrients more efficiently, grow taller, and colonize drier environments, paving the way for forests that would one day cover continents. The Silurian period witnessed the rise of the first true vascular plants, such as Cooksonia, a small branching plant only a few centimeters tall, yet remarkable because it possessed the basic structures that would later give rise to trees. Fossils of Cooksonia reveal sporangia, small capsules where spores were produced, showing that even these tiny plants had already begun to develop reproductive strategies suited for life outside the sea. Plant colonization of land had cascading effects because roots and decaying matter accelerated weathering of rocks, releasing minerals into rivers and seas, and increasing the productivity of marine ecosystems in turn. Fungi joined in symbiotic partnerships known as mycorrhizae, where plant roots traded sugars for nutrients extracted from soils, a relationship that remains fundamental to ecosystems even today. The Devonian period is often called the Age of Forests, because by this time plants had grown into towering trees such as Archaeopteris, with woody trunks and complex root systems that stabilized soils and transformed landscapes into green environments. Forests altered global systems by drawing down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through photosynthesis, cooling the climate and creating habitats that would soon be colonized by the first animals to venture onto land. Arthropods were among the earliest animal pioneers, with millipede-like creatures leaving trackways across Devonian soils, evidence that invertebrates were already exploring the terrestrial realm. Insects soon followed, evolving from aquatic ancestors, and their ability to fly made them the first creatures to dominate both land and air, pollinating plants, feeding on them, and establishing entirely new ecological interactions. Amphibians represent the most famous transition of this time, for they arose from lobe-finned fishes with strong fins and primitive lungs, adapting to shallow swamps where the boundary between water and land was blurred. Fossils such as Tiktaalik, discovered in 2004 on Ellesmere Island by Neil Shubin and colleagues, provide a vivid snapshot of this transition, showing a creature with both fish-like gills and fins as well as wrist bones capable of supporting its body in shallow water. Tiktaalik demonstrates that evolution often works through intermediate forms, creatures adapted for dual environments that bridge the gap between ocean and land, paving the way for fully terrestrial vertebrates. The colonization of land by vertebrates was gradual, with early amphibians still tied to water for reproduction, their eggs vulnerable to drying out, but over time evolutionary solutions would arise to free them from this constraint. By the late Devonian, ecosystems had become rich mosaics of forests, swamps, rivers and lakes filled with insects buzzing above, amphibians prowling below, and plants creating canopies that altered climate and nutrient cycles. This transformation of land from barren rock to thriving green world was one of the most profound in Earth's history, for it established the foundation of terrestrial ecosystems that still sustain life today. The spread of plants across the continents brought profound changes not only to landscapes but also to the atmosphere. For forests absorbed vast amounts of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis and released oxygen, creating air more breathable than at any time before. Geological evidence indicates that during the late Devonian and early Carboniferous periods, oxygen levels may have risen to nearly double modern concentrations, fueling ecosystems and allowing animals to reach extraordinary sizes. Insects took advantage of this oxygen-rich atmosphere, with dragonflies such as Meganeura growing wingspans of over 70 centimeters, their enormous bodies supported by the abundance of oxygen in the air. Amphibians also diversified during this time, with species evolving stronger limbs and more robust lungs that allowed them to spend longer periods away from water, establishing themselves as some of the first vertebrate inhabitants of forests and swamps. The Carboniferous period witnessed the spread of vast swampy forests dominated by giant ferns, horsetails and lycophytes, plants that grew into towering forms and covered entire continents with lush vegetation. These dense forests created massive deposits of organic matter, and over millions of years their remains were buried and compressed into coal, forming the carbon-rich fuel that humans would one day use to power industry. The coal swamps of the Carboniferous provided habitats for a growing diversity of animals, including amphibians that developed increasingly varied body forms, from crocodile-like predators to smaller species adapted for insect hunting. Reptiles emerged during this period as well, distinguished from amphibians by their ability to lay eggs with protective shells, freeing them from the need to return to water for reproduction and opening the path to full terrestrial life. This innovation, known as the amniotic egg, was one of the most significant evolutionary advances in Earth's history, because it allowed vertebrates to conquer a wider range of environments on land. Fossils of early reptiles such as Hylonomus, discovered in the fossilized stumps of ancient trees in Nova Scotia, provide a glimpse of these pioneering creatures as they hunted insects and laid their eggs in the safety of forest floors. Insects, plants, fungi, amphibians, and reptiles formed the foundations of ecosystems that were increasingly complex, with food webs linking producers, consumers, and decomposers in intricate cycles of energy and matter. These early terrestrial ecosystems created a feedback loop with the atmosphere, as photosynthesis pumped oxygen into the skies while decomposition and respiration balanced the cycle, stabilizing conditions that supported continued biodiversity. By the late Carboniferous, oxygen levels reached peaks so high that wildfires became more frequent, for even damp vegetation could ignite more easily in such a highly oxygenated environment, shaping ecosystems through cycles of destruction and renewal. The interplay between plants and atmosphere demonstrates once again the coevolution of life and planet, where organisms not only adapt to their environments but also transform them on a global scale. Forests expanded across continents, rivers meandered through green valleys, and swamps teemed with life, creating some of the most biologically productive landscapes in Earth's deep history. Within these forests, arthropods such as millipedes reached lengths of over 2 meters, while amphibians prowled beneath the canopy, and reptiles ventured further into drier regions, marking the diversification of terrestrial vertebrates. The Carboniferous world was both alien and familiar, with towering plants unlike modern trees, insects of impossible size, and ecosystems vibrant with life that set the template for much of what we recognize in terrestrial environments today. Life's conquest of land was not without setbacks, for environmental changes such as shifting climates and falling oxygen levels eventually contributed to extinctions that reshaped ecosystems, reminding us that stability is always temporary in deep time. Yet the fundamental innovations of this period, vascular plants, forests, insects, amphibians, and reptiles, ensured that life had permanently established itself on land, never to retreat again to the oceans alone. The colonization of land represents one of the greatest chapters in Earth's history, for it turned barren continents into living landscapes and laid the foundation for the further rise of reptiles, dinosaurs, mammals, and eventually humans. By the close of the Carboniferous, Earth was transformed into a world where life not only thrived in the seas but also flourished across forests, swamps, and valleys, setting the stage for the next dramatic shifts in climate and evolution. The history of life on Earth is not only a story of expansion and flourishing but also of collapse, for throughout deep time there have been moments when ecosystems unraveled, species vanished, and evolution was forced through narrow bottlenecks that redirected the future of the biosphere. These catastrophic intervals are known as mass extinctions, and they are defined by the loss of a significant proportion of species in a relatively short span of geological time, reshaping ecosystems on a global scale. 5 such mass extinctions are traditionally recognized, each leaving an indelible mark on the fossil record, with survivors carrying forward the legacy of entire worlds lost to catastrophe. The first of these great crises occurred near the end of the Ordovician period around 444 million years ago, when glaciations lowered sea levels dramatically, eliminating shallow marine habitats where most life was concentrated. Paleontologists estimate that about 85% of marine species perished during this extinction, though many lineages eventually recovered in the Silurian, demonstrating life's resilience even in the face of near annihilation. Another devastating event took place in the late Devonian around 375 million years ago, a crisis that unfolded in pulses over millions of years, likely triggered by widespread anoxia in the oceans combined with climate shifts and asteroid impacts. This extinction severely affected reef-building organisms and armored fish known as placoderms, opening ecological space for new lineages such as sharks and ray-finned fishes that would dominate the seas thereafter. The most catastrophic mass extinction in Earth's history occurred at the end of the Permian period about 252 million years ago, often referred to as the Great Dying, when more than 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates disappeared. Geological evidence points to massive volcanic eruptions in the Siberian Traps as the primary driver, releasing vast quantities of carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and methane into the atmosphere, triggering global warming, acid rain, and ocean acidification. Studies of isotopic anomalies and carbon and sulfur cycles confirm that the Earth system was thrown into chaos, with runaway greenhouse conditions raising temperatures, oceans losing oxygen, and ecosystems collapsing in a cascade of feedback loops. The magnitude of the Permian extinction was so severe that it nearly reset the evolutionary clock, yet it also cleared the way for new groups to rise, including the ancestors of dinosaurs, mammals, and modern reptiles. Paleontologist Douglas Irwin has studied this event extensively, emphasizing that it demonstrates how interconnected Earth systems are. For volcanic eruptions, climate, oceans, and biology all contributed to a global collapse. The next great crisis unfolded at the end of the Triassic period around 201 million years ago, eliminating about 3/4 of all species, an event linked to massive volcanic activity during the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea. This extinction cleared ecological space for dinosaurs to rise to dominance during the Jurassic, demonstrating once again how extinction events not only destroy but also reshape evolutionary pathways. The most famous mass extinction is the Cretaceous Paleogene event 66 million years ago, when a giant asteroid struck near what is now the Yucatan Peninsula, creating the Chicxulub crater and unleashing global devastation. Evidence for this impact was first uncovered by Luis and Walter Alvarez in 1980 when they identified a thin layer of iridium-rich clay in rocks worldwide, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. The impact released energy equivalent to billions of nuclear weapons, igniting global wildfires, sending tsunamis racing across oceans and throwing dust and sulfur aerosols into the atmosphere that blocked sunlight for months to years. Without sunlight, photosynthesis collapsed, plant life died back, food chains unraveled, and within a geologically brief span, the non-avian dinosaurs that had dominated the land for over 160 million years were gone. Birds, as descendants of small feathered theropods, survived this catastrophe, along with mammals, reptiles, and amphibians, which diversified rapidly in the Paleogene to fill the empty ecological spaces left behind. Each mass extinction reminds us that Earth's history is not a steady progression but a punctuated narrative, where long ages of stability are interrupted by sudden crises that redefine what kinds of life can flourish. The concept of evolutionary bottlenecks comes from this pattern, for surviving lineages often represent only a fraction of previous diversity, and their descendants shape the future world in unexpected ways. Had different species survived each crisis, the path of evolution could have been entirely different, perhaps without dinosaurs, mammals, or even humans. A sobering reminder of the contingency of our own existence. The fossil record makes clear that extinction and evolution are inseparable, with losses clearing space for innovations, and crises forcing adaptations that would never have arisen in times of stability. The aftermath of each mass extinction was a world of silence and emptiness, where ecosystems had collapsed and survivors found themselves in landscapes stripped of diversity, forced to adapt quickly or vanish themselves. Recovery from such crises often took millions of years, for while evolution can diversify rapidly, it takes vast spans of time to rebuild the complexity of food webs and restore ecological balance across continents and seas. The Ordovician extinction paved the way for new groups of corals and jawed fishes to expand, filling niches left behind by vanished species, and demonstrating that extinction can act as both a destroyer and a catalyst for innovation. In the wake of the Devonian extinction, sharks and ray-finned fishes flourished, taking over the seas once dominated by armored placoderms, while terrestrial ecosystems grew richer with amphibians and the first reptiles. The Great Dying of the Permian reset the biosphere so dramatically that entire ecosystems had to be reinvented. And it was during the Triassic that new lineages such as dinosaurs, crocodiles, and mammals began their evolutionary experiments. Dinosaurs in particular took advantage of empty landscapes, diversifying into herbivores and predators of every size, while mammals remained small but adaptable, surviving in ecological shadows for over 150 million years. The Triassic extinction reinforced this dynamic, removing many competitors and ensuring that dinosaurs would rise to dominance during the Jurassic and Cretaceous, their reign lasting longer than the time since their disappearance. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, it ended the age of dinosaurs but also created the ecological space in which mammals could diversify, eventually giving rise to primates, whales, bats, and the ancestors of humanity. Evolutionary bottlenecks highlight the fragility of life because each time Earth lost the majority of its species, the survivors were not necessarily the most advanced or powerful, but those most suited to endure the particular stresses of catastrophe. Small body size, flexible diets, and high reproductive rates often gave an edge, traits that allowed birds and mammals to outlast the dinosaurs, just as other generalist lineages had outlasted competitors in earlier crises. The long-term evolutionary consequences of these extinctions ripple through every ecosystem today, for our forests, oceans, and grasslands are all shaped by lineages that were filtered through past bottlenecks. Had placoderms survived the Devonian extinction, or had non-avian dinosaurs endured past the Cretaceous, the dominant forms of life today would look unimaginably different, and humans might never have emerged at all. The study of these events is not only about the distant past, but also about patterns, for paleontologists and evolutionary biologists seek to understand how life responds to crisis, how diversity rebounds, and what governs survival. Luis and Walter Alvarez provided a model for such work with their iridium discovery, showing how geology and paleontology can converge to explain sudden events, and inspiring further interdisciplinary studies of extinction mechanisms. Douglas Irwin's research into the Permian emphasizes feedback loops in the Earth system, where volcanic carbon emissions triggered climate change, ocean anoxia, and biodiversity collapse, a chain reaction that resonates with modern concerns. These lessons are sobering because they reveal that extinction is not only a biological event but an Earth system event where geology, chemistry, climate, and biology intersect in ways that can destabilize the entire planet. Modern scientists debate whether humanity is driving a sixth mass extinction today, with species vanishing at rates comparable to past crises, largely due to habitat destruction, climate change, and overexploitation of resources. The fossil record warns us that such collapses reshape life for tens of millions of years, meaning the choices made in our own era may echo far beyond the present, determining what kind of biosphere will emerge in the future. Extinction events therefore serve as both grim reminders of fragility and profound examples of resilience, for while the majority of species may vanish, life itself has always endured, adapting and reinventing itself in new forms. Each bottleneck narrowed the tree of life but also forced innovation, ensuring that the history of evolution is not one of uninterrupted continuity, but of rebirths from the edge of annihilation. The story of mass extinctions is the story of endings and beginnings, of destruction that clears the stage for new actors, and of survival that carries forward the thread of life across unimaginable spans of time. The Triassic world that followed the Permian extinction was a landscape of recovery and rebuilding, where new lineages of reptiles began to experiment with forms and lifestyles that would eventually give rise to the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs first appeared around 230 million years ago, small and lightly built creatures that moved quickly on two legs, hunting insects and small vertebrates while avoiding larger predators that still dominated the Triassic. Paleontologists studying fossils from Argentina and Brazil have uncovered some of the earliest known dinosaurs such as Eoraptor and Herrerasaurus, showing that their beginnings were modest rather than dominant. The extinction at the end of the Triassic cleared away many competitors, opening ecological space that allowed dinosaurs to diversify rapidly during the Jurassic, when they grew larger, more specialized, and more ecologically important. By the Middle Jurassic, dinosaurs had expanded into nearly every niche on land, from enormous long-necked sauropods grazing on vegetation to swift theropods hunting prey with speed and precision. Sauropods such as Brachiosaurus and Diplodocus became some of the largest animals ever to walk the earth, their long necks enabling them to reach the tops of trees and consume enormous quantities of leaves each day. Theropods, including Allosaurus in the Jurassic and later Tyrannosaurus in the Cretaceous, developed sharp teeth, powerful jaws, and keen senses, becoming apex predators that shaped ecosystems by controlling herbivore populations. Dinosaurs were not the only reptiles of this era, for flying pterosaurs filled the skies with leathery wingspans ranging from small, bird-sized forms to giants like Quetzalcoatlus, which soared above late Cretaceous landscapes. The oceans were equally dominated by reptilian giants such as ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs, each specialized for life in the seas and forming marine ecosystems as diverse and dramatic as those on land. Fossil discoveries show that dinosaurs were not always the sluggish reptiles once imagined, but were active animals, many with high metabolisms, and evidence such as bone structure and isotopic studies suggest that some species may have been warm-blooded. The discovery of feathered dinosaurs in China, particularly in the Liaoning province, revolutionized our understanding of this group, showing that many theropods bore feathers and that birds are their living descendants. Archaeopteryx, discovered in Germany in 1861, provided one of the first clear links between dinosaurs and birds, with feathered wings, a wishbone, and flight feathers alongside teeth and a long bony tail. The recognition of birds as dinosaurs represents one of the great triumphs of paleontology, confirming that the dinosaur lineage did not vanish entirely at the end of the Cretaceous but continues to thrive today in every corner of the globe. The age of dinosaurs lasted for over 160 million years, encompassing the Jurassic and Cretaceous, a reign longer than the entire span of mammalian dominance that followed their extinction. Continental drift during this time reshaped habitats, as the breakup of the supercontinent Pangaea split land masses into northern Laurasia and southern Gondwana, isolating populations and fueling evolutionary diversification. Climate during the Mesozoic was warmer than today, with high sea levels flooding continents and creating shallow inland seas where marine reptiles and ammonites thrived alongside corals and fish. Plant life also transformed ecosystems, with the rise of flowering plants in the Cretaceous providing new food sources for herbivores and new ecological opportunities for insects, birds, and mammals. Pollination, seed dispersal, and coevolution between plants and animals accelerated during this time, demonstrating how tightly linked biological innovations can reshape entire ecosystems. The fossil record from this era shows not only grandeur but also vulnerability, for many lineages rose to dominance only to vanish, replaced by others better suited to shifting climates and ecological pressures. Dinosaurs adapted to deserts, forests, swamps, and coastal plains, their versatility contributing to their extraordinary longevity as the ruling terrestrial animals of the Mesozoic. The age of dinosaurs demonstrates how evolution, geography, and climate work together to produce extraordinary diversity, but it also foreshadows the fragility of dominance, for no lineage holds power forever in Earth's shifting story. Dinosaurs reached their peak diversity during the Cretaceous period, when continents had drifted into new arrangements and ecosystems became more varied than ever before, ranging from lush coastal swamps to arid deserts and temperate forests. Herbivorous dinosaurs developed extraordinary adaptations to exploit the expanding range of plants, with hadrosaurs evolving broad duck-like bills for cropping vegetation and intricate dental batteries for grinding tough plant material. Ceratopsians such as Triceratops developed elaborate frills and horns, features that may have served as defense against predators, tools for combat within their own species, and even as displays to attract mates. Sauropods remained giants of the land, with titanosaurs in the southern continents reaching lengths of over 30 meters, their sheer size making them nearly immune to predation and their herds reshaping entire landscapes through feeding. Predatory theropods grew ever more sophisticated, from swift dromaeosaurs armed with sickle-shaped claws to massive apex hunters like Tyrannosaurus rex, whose bite force remains one of the most powerful known in the animal kingdom. Fossil evidence shows that many theropods exhibited parental care, guarding nests and tending to hatchlings, behaviors once thought unique to birds but now recognized as part of their shared dinosaurian heritage. The connection between dinosaurs and birds grew ever clearer during the Cretaceous, with fossils such as Microraptor revealing 4 wings and feathers adapted for gliding, bridging the gap between flightless theropods and early avian forms. The rise of flowering plants accelerated evolutionary change, for they produced seeds, fruits, and nectar that attracted insects, birds, and mammals, weaving a new web of ecological relationships that transformed the biosphere. Insects diversified alongside these plants, with pollinators spreading rapidly and creating mutualistic relationships that persist to this day, evidence of the power of coevolution in shaping biodiversity. Continental drift during the Cretaceous isolated populations, leading to distinct dinosaur faunas in North America, South America, Asia, and Africa, each developing unique adaptations shaped by local climates and environments. High sea levels created shallow inland seas such as the Western Interior Seaway in North America, dividing the continent and producing coastal ecosystems where marine reptiles, fish, and seabirds thrived alongside terrestrial dinosaurs. Climate remained warm, but fluctuations in sea levels and volcanism produced environmental stress, foreshadowing the instability that would mark the end of the Cretaceous. The reign of dinosaurs came to an abrupt and dramatic close around 66 million years ago, when a 10-kilometer-wide asteroid slammed into the Yucatan Peninsula, releasing energy beyond imagination and reshaping Earth's biosphere. The Chicxulub impact vaporized rock, ignited forests, and sent a global cloud of dust and sulfur aerosols into the sky, blocking sunlight and plunging the planet into months of darkness. Photosynthesis collapsed, plants withered, and food chains disintegrated, leaving only small, adaptable species with flexible diets capable of enduring the famine that followed. Non-avian dinosaurs disappeared in the wake of this catastrophe, leaving birds as the only surviving lineage, while mammals, reptiles, and amphibians endured and began new evolutionary radiations. The end of the Cretaceous was not caused by the asteroid alone, for massive volcanic eruptions in the Deccan Traps of India also released carbon dioxide and sulfur, compounding environmental stresses with warming, acid rain, and ocean changes. Scientists continue to debate the relative roles of impact and volcanism, yet most agree that the asteroid was the decisive blow that tipped ecosystems already under stress into collapse. The disappearance of the dinosaurs reminds us that dominance offers no guarantee of permanence, for after 160 million years of success, they vanished in the geological blink of an eye. Survivors carried forward the thread of life into the Cenozoic, where mammals would diversify into forms as spectacular and varied as the dinosaurs themselves, inheriting a world forever altered by their absence. The age of dinosaurs remains one of the most extraordinary chapters in Earth's history, not only for its grandeur and diversity, but also for its dramatic conclusion, a story of rise, dominance, and sudden fall that continues to capture the human imagination. The disappearance of the non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous cleared ecological space on a scale unmatched since the Permian, leaving behind empty forests, grasslands not yet formed, and oceans stripped of familiar predators. A silent planet waiting for new lineages to fill the void. Mammals, which had remained small throughout the Mesozoic, suddenly found themselves in a world of opportunity, their adaptability allowing them to radiate into niches once dominated by reptiles of enormous size and power. For more than 150 million years, mammals had lived in the shadows of dinosaurs, many species no larger than mice or shrews, feeding at night and exploiting overlooked food sources, yet their patience was rewarded after the asteroid struck. Fossils show that within a few million years of the extinction, mammals diversified into carnivores, herbivores, insectivores, and omnivores, with body sizes ranging from tiny rodents to larger species approaching the size of modern pigs. One of the earliest groups to flourish was the multituberculates, small mammals with rodent-like teeth specialized for gnawing plants and seeds, an example of how quickly mammals exploited the spread of flowering plants in the Paleogene. Marsupials and placental mammals also began to diverge widely, with placentals eventually becoming dominant on most continents, their longer gestation periods and more developed young giving them evolutionary advantages in many environments. Birds, the only surviving dinosaurs, also radiated into countless forms, from small perching species to large flightless giants, carrying forward the evolutionary heritage of their theropod ancestors into the new Cenozoic world. Fossils such as those of the early bird Ichthyonis show toothed beaks and transitional features, evidence of the gradual refinement from reptilian ancestors into the specialized forms that now dominate the skies. The early Cenozoic climate was warm and humid, creating tropical forests that stretched across much of the globe, ecosystems rich with flowering plants, insects, and small mammals, providing fertile grounds for diversification. By 50 million years ago, mammals had diversified into recognizable groups such as primates, bats, whales, and early ungulates, each representing evolutionary experiments that would later define entire ecosystems. The ancestors of whales such as Pachycetus began as small wolf-like mammals that lived near rivers and coastal areas, slowly adapting to aquatic life until they became fully marine creatures, an extraordinary example of evolutionary transition. Flying mammals also appeared, with bats evolving wings formed from elongated fingers and thin membranes, taking advantage of nocturnal insect-rich skies and diversifying into a wide range of species within a relatively short span of time. Primates emerged in the dense forest of the Eocene, with grasping hands, forward-facing eyes, and increased brain development, adaptations that allowed them to navigate complex three-dimensional habitats in trees. Ungulates, or hoofed mammals, also radiated during this time, giving rise to ancestors of horses, rhinoceroses, and deer, animals that would later play central roles in the evolution of grassland ecosystems. The rise of mammals and birds was not only a matter of filling empty niches, but also of innovation, as new behaviors, body plans, and metabolic strategies emerged that reshaped ecosystems more profoundly than any previous group since the dinosaurs. Birds developed increasingly sophisticated flight strategies, with soaring seabirds mastering ocean winds, songbirds evolving complex vocalizations, and raptors refining talons and vision for predation, showing adaptive radiation on a grand scale. Mammals and birds both benefited from higher metabolic rates and warm-blooded physiology, traits that allowed them to remain active in a wide range of climates and to exploit ecological opportunities unavailable to cold-blooded reptiles. Continents continued to drift during the Paleogene, opening new pathways for migration, isolating populations, and creating evolutionary laboratories where species diverged in unique directions. One of the most dramatic events of this era was the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum about 56 million years ago, when a massive release of carbon into the atmosphere caused global temperatures to rise sharply, reshaping ecosystems and forcing mammals to adapt. Fossil evidence from this period shows dwarfism in some mammal lineages, perhaps a response to hotter climates and reduced food availability, illustrating how even early mammals were sensitive to rapid environmental change. Birds also adapted, with species spreading into new environments and diversifying into niches ranging from insect eating to seed cracking, filling roles once held by pterosaurs and small reptiles. The early Cenozoic thus represents a world of renewal and experimentation, where mammals and birds expanded rapidly into forms that would define the modern biosphere, carrying forward the story of life after the fall of the dinosaurs. The later Cenozoic saw mammals expand into even larger and more specialized forms, with herbivores evolving massive bodies and complex teeth to process vegetation, while carnivores developed sharper senses and powerful limbs to pursue them across open landscapes. Grasslands began to spread during the Miocene epoch around 23 million years ago, transforming ecosystems and favoring grazers such as horses, antelopes, and bison, whose high-crowned teeth were adapted to chewing abrasive grasses rich in silica. The expansion of grasslands also reshaped predator-prey dynamics, encouraging the evolution of fast-running carnivores such as cheetah-like cats and ancestral wolves, who relied on speed and endurance rather than ambush alone. Large herbivores such as rhinoceroses, camels, and elephants diversified, with elephants in particular evolving tusks and trunks that allowed them to exploit a wide variety of food sources and dominate savanna ecosystems. The Pleistocene epoch witnessed some of the most spectacular mammals in Earth's history, including mammoths with curved tusks, mastodons browsing forests, and giant ground sloths lumbering through woodlands and grasslands alike. Predators of this age grew equally impressive, with saber-toothed cats such as Smilodon using elongated canines to dispatch prey, and dire wolves hunting in coordinated packs across the Americas. Birds continued to diversify alongside these mammals, with some lineages growing flightless and gigantic, such as the terror birds of South America, apex predators that reached heights of 3 meters and dominated open plains. Other birds refined flight into extraordinary precision, with falcons and hawks developing keen eyesight for hunting, hummingbirds evolving rapid wing beats to feed on nectar, and seabirds mastering long-distance migrations across oceans. The fossil record shows that avian diversity during the Cenozoic rivaled that of mammals, with each major lineage experimenting with new ecological strategies, from seed-cracking finches to penguins adapted for cold marine environments. Primates also evolved dramatically during this time, with lemurs, monkeys, and apes adapting to forests, savannas, and varied environments, their increasing brain size and social complexity setting the stage for the eventual rise of humans. The coevolution of mammals, birds, and plants shaped modern ecosystems, with pollination, seed dispersal, predation, and grazing forming intricate webs of interaction that define terrestrial life to this day. Geological shifts during the Cenozoic also influenced evolution, as continents drifted into their present positions. The Himalayas rose from the collision of India and Asia, and ice sheets expanded across the poles, reshaping climates worldwide. Climate fluctuations became more dramatic, with cycles of glaciation and warming shaping ecosystems and migration patterns, pressures that drove adaptation and extinction alike. The Pleistocene ice ages in particular had profound effects, lowering sea levels to create land bridges between continents, enabling migration such as humans into the Americas and animals like mammoths into Eurasia and North America. Birds and mammals often responded flexibly to these shifts, migrating vast distances, altering diets, and changing behaviors in ways that allowed them to persist despite extreme environmental stress. Many of the giants of the Pleistocene eventually vanished in a wave of extinctions around 10,000 years ago, likely caused by a combination of climate change and human hunting, leaving behind ecosystems that felt suddenly emptier without them. The disappearance of mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and giant sloths demonstrates how fragile even the most imposing animals can be in the face of rapid environmental change and new predators such as humans. Despite these losses, the rise of mammals and birds after the fall of the dinosaurs ensured that Earth's biosphere entered the modern era with extraordinary richness, creating the living world that surrounds us today. The resilience and adaptability of these groups show that life can rebound from catastrophe and reinvent itself, weaving new patterns of diversity that continue to evolve before our eyes. The age of mammals and birds, which began in the shadow of the dinosaurs, has become our own age, an era where intelligence, flight, and complex societies intertwine in ways that mark a new chapter in Earth's unfolding history. The story of Earth over the past few million years has been dominated by cycles of ice and warmth, recurring glaciations that reshaped landscapes, redirected rivers, and influenced the evolution of countless species, including our own. These cycles began in earnest about 2.6 million years ago during the Pleistocene epoch, when vast ice sheets advanced and retreated across the northern hemisphere in rhythms controlled by subtle shifts in Earth's orbit and tilt. The Serbian scientist Milutin Milankovic studied these orbital variations in the early 20th century, showing how eccentricity, obliquity, and precession combine to influence the distribution of sunlight and drive the waxing and waning of ice ages. During glacial maxima, ice sheets more than 3 kilometers thick blanketed much of North America, Northern Europe, and Asia, grinding mountains into valleys and leaving behind moraines, lakes, and scars that remain visible today. Sea levels dropped by more than 100 meters as water became locked in ice, exposing continental shelves and creating land bridges such as Beringia, which linked Asia and North America and allowed animals and humans to migrate between continents. The advance of ice transformed ecosystems, forcing species to migrate, adapt, or go extinct, while tundras and steppe-like grasslands expanded southward, supporting herds of mammoths, bison, and horses. Interglacial periods brought warmth, retreating glaciers and rising seas, restoring forests and wetlands, and creating new ecological opportunities that encourage diversification and adaptation. Evidence for these cycles is preserved in ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland, which trap bubbles of ancient air, revealing atmospheric carbon dioxide levels and temperatures across hundreds of thousands of years. Analysis of these cores shows a tight connection between greenhouse gases and temperature, confirming that the climate system is sensitive to even small shifts in carbon dioxide and methane concentrations. The waxing and waning of glaciers also reshaped rivers and lakes, carving new courses through bedrock and forming basins that would later become fertile grounds for agriculture after the ice retreated. Animals evolved in response to these changing climates, with woolly mammoths growing thick coats and curved tusks for sweeping snow aside, while saber-toothed cats refined their hunting strategies for prey in open steppe environments. Humans were also shaped by these cycles, as Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, and eventually Homo sapiens developed tools, fire, and clothing that enabled survival in cold environments, spreading into regions once covered by glaciers. The presence of land bridges facilitated migrations that spread humans into new continents, while the shifting resources of glacial and interglacial cycles encouraged innovation in hunting, gathering, and eventually agriculture. Glacial cycles influenced evolution not just by shaping habitats but by isolating populations, creating pockets of species that diverged genetically and added to Earth's biological diversity. The repeated rise and fall of ice also altered ocean circulation, with cold, fresh meltwater affecting currents such as the Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, which in turn influenced climate patterns worldwide. Geological records reveal multiple ice ages in Earth's past, but the Pleistocene stands out for its direct role in shaping modern landscapes, ecosystems, and the trajectory of human history. In North America, the Laurentide ice sheet scoured the Great Lakes basin, filling it with meltwater when it retreated, while in Europe, glaciers carved the fjords of Scandinavia and the valleys of the Alps. The global consequences of these cycles extended even into the tropics, where rainfall patterns shifted, deserts expanded or contracted, and savannas alternated with forests, driving pulses of evolution in plants and animals alike. By studying pollen preserved in sediments, scientists reconstruct these shifting ecosystems, revealing that vegetation zones migrated hundreds of kilometers in response to glacial and interglacial swings. The ice ages remind us that climate is never static but dynamic, shaped by orbital rhythms, feedback loops, and biological responses, creating a planet that is constantly changing and testing the resilience of life. The later Pleistocene was marked by dramatic climatic swings, with glaciers advancing and retreating in cycles that profoundly shaped the distribution of plants, animals, and early human populations across every continent. Migrations of large mammals such as mammoths, mastodons, bison, and reindeer followed the rhythms of these changes, their herds moving southward when ice sheets advanced and northward again when warming created fertile plains. Predators including saber-toothed cats, cave lions, and dire wolves adapted to these shifting landscapes by developing powerful hunting strategies, often targeting herd animals whose numbers rose and fell with glacial cycles. Humans were also part of this dynamic system, adapting their tools, shelters, and strategies to match the challenges of colder climates and shorter growing seasons, becoming more versatile and inventive with each cycle. The anthropologist Louis Binford emphasized the role of environmental pressure in shaping human adaptation, noting that technological innovations such as tailored clothing, improved shelters, and coordinated hunting were direct responses to glacial hardships. During interglacial periods, forests returned to Europe and North America, bringing new species of deer, boar, and smaller mammals, while humans took advantage of the expanding diversity by refining traps, spears, and cooperative hunting methods. Cultural advances such as symbolic art, rituals, and early music flourished during warmer intervals, as cave paintings in places like Lascaux and Chauvet suggest that humans were not only surviving but also exploring creativity and identity. The Pleistocene also produced dramatic megafaunal extinctions, particularly toward its end around 10,000 years ago, when mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats disappeared from much of the globe. Debate continues over whether these extinctions were driven primarily by human hunting or by rapid climate change, but most scientists now accept a combination of both, with evidence of overhunting preserved in butchery marks on bones and archaeological kill sites. Paul Martin, an ecologist who proposed the overkill hypothesis, argued that human hunters arriving in new continents played a decisive role in driving megafauna to extinction, especially in the Americas and Australia. Opponents of this view emphasize that warming climates fragmented habitats, reduced food resources, and destabilized populations, leaving large animals especially vulnerable to even small amounts of hunting pressure. Ice core studies by researchers such as Willy Dansgaard revealed the astonishing pace of climatic change during the late Pleistocene, showing that temperatures could rise or fall by several degrees within mere decades, shocking ecosystems and forcing rapid adaptation. These abrupt changes, known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events, highlight how sensitive Earth's climate system can be, responding to shifts in ocean circulation and greenhouse gases in ways that ripple across the globe. Humans endured these transitions by developing increasingly complex societies, sharing knowledge and expanding into new continents, with migrations into the Americas marking one of the last great expansions of the Ice Age. Glacial retreat at the end of the Pleistocene opened fertile valleys and plains that humans quickly exploited, planting the seeds of agriculture in regions such as the Fertile Crescent, where farming first emerged about 12,000 years ago. The Holocene epoch began with this warming, marking the end of the Ice Age and the beginning of human civilization as we recognize it, with stable climates supporting crops, domestication of animals, and permanent settlements. Ice ages had sculpted the landscapes upon which these civilizations would rise, carving valleys, depositing rich soils, and leaving behind freshwater lakes that became lifelines for human communities. The memory of glacial forces endures in mountains polished by ice, fjords carved deep into coastlines, and boulders scattered far from their sources, silent monuments to the power of frozen water over time. The legacy of the Ice Ages is also imprinted in our species, for human evolution was shaped by cycles of scarcity and abundance, cold and warmth, forcing resilience, cooperation, and innovation that continue to define us today. Climate remains the great shaper of life, and the lessons of glacial cycles remind us that stability is rare, that ecosystems are fragile, and that survival depends not on strength alone, but on the ability to adapt to change. The story of humanity begins not with civilization or language, but with small populations of upright upright apes walking the landscapes of Africa several million years ago, their bodies already adapted in subtle ways to a life that blended climbing with travel across open ground. Fossils such as Australopithecus afarensis, famously represented by the skeleton nicknamed Lucy, discovered in 1974 by Donald Johanson in Ethiopia, reveal creatures with curved fingers suited for trees but pelvises and legs designed for bipedal walking. Bipedalism freed the hands for carrying food, tools, and eventually infants, an adaptation that would prove foundational for the evolutionary path leading toward modern humans. Over time, the genus Homo emerged, beginning with Homo habilis about 2.4 million years ago, known as the handyman for its association with stone tools found in East Africa, marking the dawn of technological culture. These early tools, part of what archaeologists call the Oldowan tradition, were simple flakes and choppers, yet they opened access to new food sources such as marrow and meat, fueling brain growth and social cooperation. The evolutionary lineage continued with Homo erectus, appearing around 1.8 million years ago, a species with larger brains, longer legs, and a more human-like body capable of long-distance running and endurance hunting. Fossil evidence shows that Homo erectus spread beyond Africa into Eurasia, making it the first human species to leave the continent, adapting to diverse climates from tropical forests to colder temperate zones. Control of fire, perhaps as early as 1 million years ago, transformed the human story by providing warmth, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food, which made nutrients more digestible and diets more varied. Cooking may have contributed significantly to brain expansion, as Richard Wrangham argued in his cooking hypothesis, proposing that softer, energy-rich diets supported larger brains and smaller guts in early humans. The Acheulean tool tradition emerged with Homo erectus, characterized by hand axes and bifacial tools carefully shaped for cutting, scraping, and digging, evidence of planning and shared knowledge passed across generations. By 800,000 years ago, human ancestors had learned to master fire more consistently, leaving behind charcoal deposits, hearths, and burned bones that testify to communal living and cultural transmission. Homo heidelbergensis, appearing around 600,000 years ago, showed further advances with larger brains, complex hunting strategies, and evidence of building simple shelters, marking another step closer to modern humans. From this lineage emerged both Neanderthals in Europe and Homo sapiens in Africa, demonstrating how populations separated by geography could adapt in parallel, each carrying forward the legacy of earlier hominins. Neanderthals, first identified in 1856 in Germany's Neander Valley, were robust, cold-adapted humans with stocky bodies, powerful muscles, and large noses that helped warm and humidify cold air in Ice Age Europe. Archaeological discoveries reveal that Neanderthals made tools, used fire, buried their dead, and likely communicated with symbolic behavior, challenging outdated stereotypes of them as brutish or inferior. In Africa, meanwhile, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved about 300,000 years ago, with fossils from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, providing some of the earliest evidence of our species. These early humans exhibited lighter skeletons, higher foreheads, and smaller brow ridges compared to Neanderthals, alongside cultural innovations such as ornaments, pigments, and more complex toolkits. Genetic studies have revealed that all modern humans trace their ancestry back to African populations, a finding reinforced by the pioneering work of Alan Wilson and his colleagues on mitochondrial DNA, which identified a common maternal ancestor often called mitochondrial Eve. The spread of Homo sapiens beyond Africa around 60,000 years ago marked one of the most significant migrations in Earth's history, as small groups ventured along coasts, crossed deserts, and eventually populated every continent except Antarctica. Encounters between humans and Neanderthals in Europe and Western Asia resulted in interbreeding, as confirmed by genetic evidence that shows most people today carry between 1 and 2% Neanderthal DNA in their genomes. The emergence of symbolic thought and language allowed humans to create art, music, and rituals, with cave paintings in sites like Chauvet, Altamira, and Sulawesi offering breathtaking glimpses of our ancestors' imagination. The development of advanced hunting tools such as atlatls and bows improved cooperation and efficiency, enabling humans to thrive in a wide range of environments from Ice Age tundras to tropical forests. By the end of the Pleistocene, humans were firmly established across the globe, uniquely combining biological adaptability with cultural creativity, preparing the way for the rise of agriculture, villages, and eventually civilizations. The end of the Ice Age around 12,000 years ago ushered in the Holocene epoch, a time of relative climatic stability that provided fertile ground for profound changes in human societies and the beginning of civilization. Hunter-gatherers had long relied on mobility, seasonal migrations, and intimate knowledge of landscapes, but warmer climates and richer environments encouraged experiments in settling down, cultivating plants, and domesticating animals. The Fertile Crescent of the Middle East became one of the earliest centers of agriculture, where humans began to cultivate wheat, barley, and legumes, while herding sheep, goats, and cattle, transforming both landscapes and human life. This Neolithic revolution marked a shift from dependence on wild resources to intentional control of food production, allowing populations to grow, villages to form, and social complexity to emerge. Archaeological sites such as Jericho and Sat al-Hoyuk provide evidence of some of the first permanent settlements, where mud brick houses, communal storage, and symbolic art reveal early urban life and shared cultural practices. Domestication was not limited to plants and livestock, for dogs had already been companions of humans for tens of thousands of years, aiding in hunting, protection, and companionship, forging one of the earliest human-animal partnerships. As agriculture spread into Europe, Asia, and Africa, it produced regional innovations such as rice cultivation in East Asia, millet farming in northern China, and the domestication of sorghum and yams in Africa, showing parallel experimentation across continents. The Americas also witnessed independent agricultural revolutions, with maize, beans, and squash cultivated in Mesoamerica, while potatoes and quinoa were domesticated in the Andes, feeding future civilizations such as the Maya and the Inca. Sedentary life changed human health and society, for while farming produced more reliable food, it also introduced new risks such as crowd diseases, nutritional deficiencies, and social hierarchies built around land and surplus. Writing and record keeping emerged from these settled communities, first in the form of tokens and symbols, later evolving into cuneiform in Mesopotamia and hieroglyphs in Egypt, technologies that preserved knowledge across generations. Humans developed monumental architecture, with sites such as Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey showing elaborate stone carvings and ceremonial spaces built even before the widespread adoption of farming, hinting at the deep roots of symbolic culture. The anthropologist V. Gordon Childe famously described the Neolithic revolution as a radical transformation in human history, arguing that it altered not just subsistence but social organization, technology, and even worldview. Art and ritual flourished in tandem with farming, with pottery, figurines, and painted vessels expressing both functional craftsmanship and symbolic meaning tied to fertility, cycles of nature, and community identity. The domestication of grains also influenced trade, for surplus allowed exchanges of food, obsidian, metals, and later precious goods across networks that spanned hundreds of kilometers, binding early societies together. The Holocene climate remained generally stable, but occasional droughts and floods shaped early states, pushing humans to invent irrigation, flood control, and cooperative systems of labor that laid foundations for government. By 5,000 years ago, civilizations such as Sumer in Mesopotamia, Egypt along the Nile, the Indus Valley in South Asia, and early dynasties in China had emerged, each building monumental structures, centralized power, and written traditions. These early civilizations depended on the innovations of the Neolithic, but extended them into new realms, creating laws, trade routes, and armies, institutions that defined the trajectory of human history for millennia. The long arc of human emergence demonstrates how evolution, culture, and environment interact, for bipedal apes became toolmakers became farmers, and farmers became builders of cities, reshaping Earth in unprecedented ways. Modern humans inherited not only the genetic legacy of our ancestors, but also the cultural legacy of cooperation, innovation, and imagination, traits that carried us from African savannas to global civilizations. The emergence of humans is therefore not a sudden story, but a gradual unfolding, marked by countless small steps. Walking upright, controlling fire, shaping tools, painting walls, sowing seeds, each carrying us closer to the modern world we inhabit today. The Holocene epoch saw the growth of civilizations from scattered villages into vast urban centers, with rivers such as the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, the Indus and the Yellow River serving as cradles of human culture and power. Agriculture and irrigation supported surpluses that allowed populations to expand, specialization to develop, and societies to build temples, palaces, and monuments that embodied both power and belief. Mesopotamia produced the earliest writing systems in cuneiform, while Egypt developed hieroglyphs, both marking the transition from oral traditions to permanent records that preserved administration, trade, and mythology. Civilizations rose independently across the globe, from the Olmec in Mesoamerica to the Shang in China, each developing architecture, governance, and spiritual systems adapted to their landscapes. The invention of bronze metallurgy transformed warfare and agriculture, enabling stronger tools and weapons, and later the development of iron further revolutionized technology and expanded human capacity to shape the environment. Empires emerged through conquest and trade, spreading ideas, goods, and people across continents, knitting together cultures in webs of influence that foreshadowed globalization. The Greek historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, recorded the stories of Mediterranean civilizations, blending myth and observation in ways that offered some of the earliest attempts to systematically explain human events. In India, scholars compiled the Vedas and developed philosophical traditions that would shape religions such as Hinduism and Buddhism, while in China, Confucius and Laozi laid foundations for ethical and spiritual thought that persist to this day. The Roman Empire stretched across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, building roads, aqueducts, and cities that facilitated communication, trade, and governance on a scale unmatched until modern times. Civilization, however, also meant environmental transformation, for forests were cleared, wetlands drained, and soils tilled extensively, leaving marks on landscapes that archaeologists and geologists still detect thousands of years later. The Anthropocene, a term popularized by atmospheric chemist Paul Crutzen, describes the current era in which human activity has become a planetary force, altering climate, geology, and ecosystems in ways comparable to natural processes that once shaped Earth alone. Evidence of human influence can be traced in ice cores, sediments, and even the spread of species across continents, as agriculture, industry, and technology leave unmistakable signatures in the geological record. The Industrial Revolution accelerated this influence, powered by coal, steam, and later oil, transforming societies into mechanized economies that reshaped landscapes and drove massive urbanization. The work of James Watt in refining the steam engine exemplifies how technological innovation fueled this transformation, multiplying energy available to humans far beyond what muscle, wind, or water had provided. Carbon dioxide emissions rose sharply during this era, a signal now embedded in the atmosphere and oceans, tying human progress directly to planetary change in a way unprecedented in the 4.5 billion year history of Earth. Cities grew into sprawling centers of trade and culture, their lights visible from space and their impact measurable in air quality, water usage, and the consumption of resources on a continental scale. The Anthropocene is not defined by technology alone, but by the collective choices of societies, from agriculture and deforestation to energy systems and conservation, each shaping the trajectory of both human and planetary futures. Archaeology and geology together demonstrate that while humans are a recent arrival in Earth's history, our impact has been disproportionately large, rivaling the effects of ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and even asteroid impacts in shaping the biosphere. Civilization has given rise to art, science, and philosophy, but also to pollution, inequality, and extinction, making the Anthropocene both a story of achievement and a reminder of responsibility. Modern climate change represents the most visible hallmark of the Anthropocene, with rising greenhouse gases driving temperature increases, melting glaciers, and shifting weather patterns that affect ecosystems and societies worldwide. Measurements first taken systematically by Charles Keeling in 1958 at Mauna Loa Observatory revealed the steady rise of atmospheric carbon dioxide, creating what is now known as the Keeling Curve, a simple but powerful record of human impact. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, established in 1988, has synthesized decades of research, demonstrating with overwhelming evidence that human activities are the primary driver of recent warming trends. Rising seas threaten coastal cities, shifting rainfall alters agriculture, and more frequent heat waves, storms, and droughts remind us that climate is a dynamic force with profound consequences for civilization. Biodiversity loss is another defining feature of the Anthropocene, with species vanishing at rates far above natural background extinctions, as habitats are fragmented, polluted, or replaced by farmland and cities. E.O. Wilson, a renowned biologist, warned of a potential sixth extinction driven by human activity, emphasizing that the survival of countless species depends on whether humans act as stewards or exploiters of ecosystems. Deforestation in the Amazon, coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef, and melting Arctic sea ice are among the most visible indicators of the scale of human-driven change, reminders that even the most remote places are now touched by our influence. Technology has amplified both pressures and solutions, for while fossil fuels intensified warming, renewable energy, conservation strategies, and international cooperation demonstrate that humanity can redirect its trajectory. Nuclear weapons, first developed during the mid-20th century, left radioactive isotopes detectable worldwide, a marker that geologists consider a potential golden spike for formally defining the Anthropocene in the geological timescale. Plastic pollution provides another geological marker, with microplastics embedded in sediments, beaches, and even deep-sea environments, a synthetic legacy that will persist for millennia. Civilizations now face the paradox of extraordinary knowledge and power paired with environmental vulnerability, for we can map the human genome, travel into space, and manipulate atoms, yet we struggle to maintain the stability of our own biosphere. The Anthropocene is not only a story of crisis but also of awareness, as humans recognize their role as planetary agents and debate how to balance growth, equity, and sustainability in the face of mounting challenges. Scholars argue that the future of the Anthropocene depends on collective decisions, with some envisioning a good Anthropocene marked by stewardship and innovation, while others warn of collapse if trends of exploitation continue unchecked. The philosopher Bruno Latour stressed that climate change forces humanity to rethink politics and identity, no longer as separate nations but as a species collectively bound to the fate of one fragile planet. Civilizations have always risen and fallen, but the Anthropocene is unique in that it is global, with every society interconnected by trade, technology, and atmosphere, meaning choices in one place ripple across the world. Whether humanity can navigate this epoch will determine not only the future of our species, but also the fate of countless others, as the biosphere itself adjusts to a dominant species unlike any seen before. The story of Earth across 4.5 billion years reveals resilience, catastrophe, and renewal, and now the thread of that story rests in human hands, an unprecedented responsibility to shape the next chapter wisely. Civilizations of the Anthropocene thus stand at the threshold, heirs to deep time yet authors of a future still unwritten, balancing on the narrow edge between destruction and stewardship. The question that remains is whether humans will choose to be caretakers of a world that gave rise to them, or remain as agents of unchecked transformation, a choice that will echo not just for centuries but for millions of years to come. The story of Earth does not end with humanity, for the planet has a future that stretches billions of years beyond our species, guided by the rhythms of geology, biology, and the evolution of the sun itself. Over the next few million years, continents will continue to drift, mountains will rise and erode, and climates will shift, ensuring that the landscapes we recognize today will be transformed into new forms beyond imagination. Plate tectonics will carry the Atlantic Ocean wider while the Pacific shrinks, and new supercontinents will eventually form, fusing land masses together in cycles that have repeated many times in Earth's deep history. Climate will continue to fluctuate, shaped by orbital variations, volcanic activity, and carbon cycles, reminding us that stability is temporary and change is the constant condition of Earth's environment. If humans endure long enough, they may witness the creation of a new supercontinent. Scientists have proposed names like Amarsia or Pangaea Proxima, an assembly that would alter ocean currents, weather, and the biosphere profoundly. In the nearer term, ecosystems will evolve with or without us as species adapt, migrate, or vanish in response to the pressures of climate, competition, and chance, continuing the cycle of life and extinction that has marked the planet since its beginning. Within 1 billion years, however, changes in the sun will begin to dominate Earth's fate, for our star is slowly brightening, increasing its energy output as it fuses hydrogen into helium in its core. This increase will warm Earth to the point where oceans evaporate and the greenhouse effect runs away, ending the biosphere as we know it and transforming the planet into a hot, uninhabitable world. James Casting, a planetary scientist, has modeled these future scenarios, estimating that complex life may have only about 1 billion years left before rising solar luminosity pushes Earth into a runaway climate state. In roughly 5 billion years, the sun will exhaust its hydrogen fuel, swell into a red giant, and engulf Mercury and Venus, while Earth's surface will be scorched, its atmosphere stripped, and its oceans long gone. The final fate of Earth lies in stellar evolution, as the sun sheds its outer layers and becomes a white dwarf, leaving behind a charred and lifeless planet orbiting a dim stellar ember. Yet life may not end with Earth, for humanity or its descendants could expand into the solar system, colonizing Mars, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, or even building space habitats that sustain civilization beyond the cradle of our planet. The visionary work of Carl Sagan and others emphasize that exploration of the cosmos is not just curiosity, but survival, for the long-term future of life requires reaching beyond a planet whose habitability is finite. Exoplanet discoveries have revealed thousands of worlds orbiting distant stars, some in the habitable zones where liquid water might exist, raising the possibility that life has arisen elsewhere and that we are not alone. Technologies such as the James Webb Space Telescope extend our vision into these distant systems, searching atmospheres for signatures of gases that might betray the presence of living processes. Even if Earth's biosphere is destined to fade, the story of life may continue elsewhere, whether carried by humanity or discovered as alien ecosystems evolving under suns unlike our own. The Anthropocene reminds us that humans are already planetary agents, capable of shaping climate, geology, and evolution, which suggests that our choices may determine whether life remains confined or spreads beyond Earth. In contemplating the future, we confront both awe and humility, for Earth's 4.5 billion year journey shows resilience and change, while our species holds the responsibility of deciding how its next chapters unfold. The question for humanity is whether we will become a fleeting branch in life's tree or the stewards who ensure that Earth's story continues beyond the lifespan of its star. The vast timeline of Earth's history reminds us that permanence is an illusion, for continents shift, climates fluctuate, species rise and fall, and even stars exhaust their fuel, leaving behind only echoes of the worlds they once sustained. In this perspective, humanity's existence is but a fleeting moment, a thin line of light woven into a tapestry that stretches across billions of years. Yet within this brief window we hold the power to shape the destiny of life itself. The scientific legacy of thinkers such as Charles Darwin, who illuminated the principle of evolution by natural selection, continues to guide our understanding of life's adaptability and the profound unity of all organisms on Earth. Modern cosmology, pioneered by Albert Einstein and expanded by Edwin Hubble, has revealed that our universe itself is dynamic, expanding and evolving, suggesting that the story of Earth is part of an even grander narrative of cosmic change. If life spreads to other planets or distant stars, it will carry with it the genetic and cultural memory of Earth, ensuring that even when this world becomes uninhabitable, its story continues in the minds and bodies of its descendants. Perhaps the greatest question is whether humanity will endure long enough to take those steps, or whether our tenure will end as countless species before us, leaving Earth to recover and reinvent itself once again. The geological record testifies that extinction is the rule and survival the exception, yet it also shows that survivors innovate, diversify, and reshape the biosphere, suggesting that even if humans falter, life will find new forms. If we succeed in preserving ourselves, the story may expand outward, with colonies on Mars, orbiting space habitats, or interstellar journeys propelled by technologies not yet imagined, fulfilling Carl Sagan's vision of a species reaching for the stars. The legacy of Earth, then, is not only in rocks, fossils, and oceans, but in the minds of those who ask questions, seek knowledge, and wonder at the vastness of the universe that cradled our beginnings. Every stromatolite, every trilobite, every dinosaur, and every human is part of a single story, one that began in stardust and continues in the fragile yet astonishingly resilient phenomenon we call life. The future of Earth and beyond is uncertain, but what is certain is that the story is unfinished, waiting to be written by the choices of species, the flow of time, and the inexhaustible creativity of evolution and the cosmos. Now, when we look into the night sky, we are looking both backward and forward, backward into light billions of years old and forward into the possible futures of worlds that may yet harbor life and thought. The story of Earth is, in truth, the story of the universe itself, for our rocks, waters, and lives are forged from ancient atoms born in stars, reminding us that we are participants in a drama that began long before us and will continue long after. In the end, whether humanity remains a short-lived experiment or becomes the steward of life's next great chapter, the journey across 4.5 billion years teaches humility, awe, and the recognition that we are both fragile and extraordinary. The final reflection may be left as a question. Given all that we know of Earth's past and all that we foresee in its future, what role will we choose to play in this vast unfolding story?